Put your hands where I can see them, right now. The voice cut through the backyard like a blade through warm summer air, sharp enough to silence laughter mid-breath. And just like that, the music from the small speaker near the patio stuttered into stillness, as if even it knew better than to keep playing. The smell of charcoal and sweet barbecue sauce hung thick under the late afternoon sun, smoke drifting lazily upward, caught in a golden beam of light that filtered through the oak trees lining the fence. But no one moved, not the kids with paper plates, not the neighbors leaning against the railing, not even the dog that had been circling near the grill moments before. Darius Coleman stood behind the barbecue, tongs in hand, a row of burgers sizzling in front of him, their edges crisping just right, the quiet crackle of heat suddenly louder than it should have been, like the world had zoomed in on the smallest sounds. He didn't turn immediately. His shoulders stayed relaxed, broad and steady, his posture calm in a way that didn't match the tension now stretching across the yard like a pulled wire. A few feet away, his son froze mid-laugh, holding a soda can that tilted slightly in his grip, fizz bubbling over the edge and dripping onto the grass. Somewhere near the picnic table, a folding chair scraped faintly against concrete, then stopped, the sound swallowed by the weight of what had just entered the space. Officer Kyle Brennan stepped forward through the open gate, his presence rigid, eyes scanning the yard not like a guest, not even like a passerby, but like someone already certain something was wrong before he even spoke. Behind him, another officer lingered near the fence line, hand resting lightly near his belt, saying nothing, just watching. Darius finally turned, slow and deliberate, placing the tongs down beside the grill with a soft metallic click that echoed more than it should have, his face composed, eyes steady, taking in the uniforms, the stance, the tension that didn't belong in a place that, just seconds ago, had been filled with nothing but music, laughter, and the easy rhythm of a Saturday afternoon. The sun caught the edge of his glasses, reflecting a brief flash of light as he looked from one officer to the other, then past them to the quiet street. Beyond, where everything else continued as if nothing had changed, a breeze moved through the yard, lifting the corner of a napkin on the table, carrying the scent of grilled meat and cut grass across the stillness, brushing lightly against faces that had gone suddenly unsure. No one spoke. Not yet. The moment stretched, suspended, like something waiting to fall. And in the center of it all, Darius stood still, not raising his voice, not stepping back, just present, grounded, as if he understood something the rest of the yard was only beginning to feel. Darius wiped his hands slowly on a folded cloth resting beside the grill, the fabric already stained with dark streaks of sauce and smoke, then set it down with the same careful precision he used for everything else in his life, as if small actions still mattered even when the air had shifted into something heavier, something uncertain. Up close, the heat from the grill pressed against his skin, steady and familiar, a quiet contrast to the unfamiliar tension spreading through the yard, and for a brief second, he let his eyes drop to the row of burgers, still cooking, still following their own simple logic, untouched by whatever had just walked in through the gate. Then he looked back up. "Officer," he said, his voice even, not loud, not soft, just steady, carrying across the silence without forcing its way through it. "Is there a reason you are interrupting a family gathering?" The words did not challenge. They did not plead. They simply existed, clear and direct, and that alone seemed to shift something in the air, subtle but real. Officer Brennan's gaze tightened, his jaw setting as if the calm itself was unexpected, like he had prepared for something louder, something easier to respond to. "We received a call," Brennan replied, his tone clipped, each word placed carefully, "about a disturbance. Loud noise. Possible violation." His eyes moved again, sweeping across the backyard, lingering on faces, on plates, on the grill, as though searching for confirmation of something that had not yet shown itself. Darius followed that gaze for a moment, taking in the same details, the paper lanterns strung along the fence, the cooler half full of ice and soda cans, the old radio still sitting silent near the patio chair. Then he nodded once, slowly. "It is Saturday," he said, the hint of a breath behind the words, "around 4 in the afternoon. This is a barbecue." A faint shift rippled through the group behind him, not movement, not quite, but awareness, like people remembering where they were supposed to stand. His son lowered the soda can, gripping it with both hands now, eyes flicking between his father and the officers, trying to read something in the space between them. A woman near the table folded her arms, not in defiance, but in quiet uncertainty, her fingers pressing lightly against her sleeves as if grounding herself. Brennan stepped forward another pace, boots pressing into the grass, flattening a patch near the edge of the concrete where the yard met the patio, and the sound, soft as it was, landed louder than it should have. "We are going to need identification from everyone here," he said, glancing briefly at his partner, then back to Darius, "just to verify everything checks out." The sentence hung there, heavier than the words themselves, stretching across the yard, settling into corners it did not belong in. Darius did not move right away. His hands rested loosely at his sides, fingers relaxed, shoulders still squared but not rigid, and for a moment, he simply breathed, slow and measured, the kind of breath that comes from years of choosing calm when something else might be easier. The breeze returned, light and warm, carrying the faint crackle of the grill and the distant hum of a passing car beyond the fence, ordinary sounds that now felt distant, like they belonged to another place entirely. He glanced back toward his family, just once, his eyes softening for a fraction of a second when they met his son's. Then he looked forward again, meeting Brennan's gaze without lowering his own. "Everyone here is family or neighbors," he said, still calm, still steady. "We are not causing harm, and we are on private property." No rise in tone, no sharp edges, just fact. Brennan's expression did not change, but something in the space between them did, subtle and shifting, like a line being drawn that had not been there before, not visible, not spoken, but unmistakably present. And for the first time since the officers stepped into the yard, it was no longer just about who had entered, but about what they expected to find and what they were actually facing. "Officer." Brennan did not respond right away, and that silence, brief as it was, stretched longer than it should have, settling into the space between him and Darius like something testing its own weight, something deciding whether to hold or collapse. His eyes narrowed slightly, not in confusion, but in calculation, as if he was adjusting to a version of this moment that did not match the one he had expected when he first stepped through the gate. Behind him, the second officer shifted his stance, glancing toward the street for a second before returning his attention to the yard, his hand no longer as firm near his belt, but not fully relaxed either. The air felt thicker now, not louder, just heavier, like even the breeze had slowed to watch what would happen next. Darius remained where he was, feet planted on the concrete edge near the grill, the heat from the coals steady against his side, grounding him in something real while everything else hovered on uncertainty. He reached for the tongs again, not hurried, not hesitant, just natural, and turned one of the burgers with a soft, controlled motion, the sizzle rising briefly before settling back into its quiet rhythm, a small, almost ordinary action that somehow carried more weight than any raised voice could have. The smell of grilled meat deepened as the surface caramelized, drifting outward into the yard, wrapping around people who had not moved, who were still standing in place, as if waiting for permission to breathe normally again. Brennan watched that movement, the simple act of cooking, and for a fraction of a second, something unreadable passed across his face, something close to irritation, or maybe something closer to being unsettled by what he could not easily control. "I gave you a directive," Brennan said, his voice firmer now, though not louder, the words sharpened just enough to try and reclaim the space. "Identification." Darius did not look away from the grill immediately. He adjusted the position of another burger, aligning it carefully, making sure the heat was even, then set the tongs down once more, resting them across the edge of the metal surface with a quiet precision. Only then did he turn fully, facing Brennan again, his expression unchanged, calm, present, but now carrying something more defined beneath it, not resistance, not defiance, but clarity. "And I heard you," he replied, his tone steady, each word placed without force, "but you have not explained a lawful reason to request it from every person here." The sentence landed differently than before, not just a statement, but a line, subtle yet unmistakable, drawn without raising volume, without stepping forward, yet impossible to ignore. A faint murmur moved through the group behind him, not words, just breath, just the sound of people recognizing something shift, something that was no longer one-sided. Brennan's partner glanced at him again, this time longer, as if waiting for a signal, for a next step that had not yet been decided. The sun dipped slightly lower, the light warming into a deeper gold that stretched shadows across the yard, long and soft, touching the edges of shoes, chairs, and the fence line, turning everything just a little quieter, a little more still. Darius folded his hands loosely in front of him, not closed, not tense, just resting, his shoulders relaxed, his breathing even, the kind of stillness that did not come from hesitation, but from control, from knowing exactly where he stood and why he was not moving from it. Brennan inhaled slowly, his chest rising, then falling, his gaze fixed on Darius as if trying to measure him, to find something that would tip the balance back into something predictable, something familiar. But nothing in Darius shifted. Not his posture, not his tone, not the quiet certainty that now filled the space between them. And in that moment, without any raised voices, without any sudden movement, the center of the yard changed, no longer defined by who had entered, but by who remained unshaken. The silence did not break all at once. It shifted, slowly, like something heavy being moved inch by inch, and then it settled again, tighter this time, closer, as if the space itself had leaned in. Officer Brennan took another step forward, not rushed, not aggressive, but deliberate, his boots pressing into the ground with a soft weight that seemed louder now than before, each movement measured as though he was trying to reclaim something slipping just out of reach. "You are making this more complicated than it needs to be," he said, his voice controlled, but edged now with a firmness that had not been there a moment ago, the kind of tone meant to close conversations rather than open them. His partner shifted again behind him, eyes moving between Darius and the small group gathered near the table, then back to Brennan, waiting, always waiting. Darius did not respond immediately. He reached for a small paper plate resting near the grill, picked it up, and placed 2 finished burgers onto it with care, the juices still glistening under the warm light, then set the plate down beside the stack of buns, as if continuing the rhythm of the afternoon mattered, as if normal still had a place here. The faint crackle of the grill carried on, steady and unchanged, a quiet anchor against the tension that refused to leave. A child's voice, barely above a whisper, asked something from the far side of the yard, then faded quickly when no one answered. Darius glanced in that direction for just a second, his expression softening again in that brief, almost invisible way, before he turned back, meeting Brennan's eyes once more. "I am not making anything complicated," he said, his tone even, grounded, the words moving without resistance. "I am asking for clarity." The sentence did not rise, did not push, but it did not retreat either. It held. Brennan exhaled through his nose, a subtle shift in his posture giving away a flicker of impatience, his shoulders tightening just slightly before settling again, as if he was recalibrating, adjusting to a situation that was not unfolding the way he had anticipated. The sun dipped lower, stretching the shadows further across the yard, long lines crossing the concrete and grass, touching the edge of the grill, the table, the shoes of those still standing in quiet observation. The golden light softened everything except the tension. Darius took a slow breath, then lifted his hand, not high, not sudden, just enough to bring it into view, and reached into the back pocket of his jeans with a motion so calm it felt almost routine. There was no urgency in it, no hesitation either, just a deliberate choice. Brennan's eyes followed the movement instantly, sharp, focused, his stance tightening again, attention narrowing to that single action as if everything else had fallen away. Darius pulled out a slim leather wallet, worn at the edges, the kind of wear that comes from years of use, from being carried daily, from holding things that matter. He did not open it right away. Instead, he held it loosely in his hand for a moment, letting the silence sit between them again, letting the weight of the moment settle fully before moving forward. Behind him, someone shifted their footing, the faint sound of gravel pressing under a shoe, then stillness returned just as quickly. Darius finally opened the wallet, slow and precise, the leather folding back without a sound, and turned it slightly, not thrusting it forward, not presenting it like something to prove, but holding it at a level where it could be seen if Brennan chose to look. The light caught the edge of the card inside, a small reflection flashing briefly before settling. "You asked for identification," Darius said quietly, his voice unchanged, steady as before. "So let us be clear about what that means." He did not step closer. He did not raise his hand any higher. He simply held it there, calm, unwavering, as the space between them shifted once more, no longer defined by demand, but by what was about to be revealed. The wallet remained steady in Darius's hand, not pushed forward, not hidden away, just present, and for a moment that felt longer than it was. No one moved to close the distance between what was being shown and what needed to be understood. The late afternoon light shifted again, catching the edge of the open leather and reflecting softly across Brennan's face. A small flicker that made him blink once, almost imperceptibly, before his eyes narrowed slightly to focus. The yard held its breath. The quiet crackle of the grill continued behind Darius, a low, steady rhythm that felt almost out of place now, like something ordinary refusing to disappear completely. A bead of condensation slid down the side of a forgotten soda can on the table, dripping onto the wood with a faint tap that no one acknowledged but everyone somehow heard. Brennan took a half step closer, not enough to break the space entirely, but enough that he could see clearly, his gaze dropping briefly to the card inside the wallet. His expression did not change immediately, but something beneath it shifted, something subtle and unspoken, like a calculation being interrupted mid-process. Darius did not move his hand. He did not tilt the wallet further or pull it back. He simply held it there, letting the moment unfold on its own terms. "Go ahead," he said, quietly, his voice even, not inviting, not challenging, just allowing the truth to be seen without force. Brennan's jaw tightened slightly as he leaned in just enough to read, his eyes scanning the card, then pausing, then returning again as if confirming what he had just seen. The shift this time was clearer, not loud, not dramatic, but undeniable, a hesitation that had not been there before, a break in the certainty that had carried him into the yard. Behind him, his partner straightened just a fraction, noticing the pause, sensing the change without yet knowing its cause. The breeze moved again, lifting the edge of a paper plate, carrying the scent of smoke and seasoning across the space, brushing past faces that were no longer tense in the same way, but alert, attentive, watching something turn. Darius finally lowered the wallet slightly, not closing it yet, just enough to ease the moment without ending it, his posture still relaxed, shoulders loose, his presence steady in a way that did not demand attention, but held it anyway. "You wanted identification," he said, the words measured, calm. "So now you know who you were speaking to." Brennan exhaled slowly, the sound quiet but noticeable in the stillness, his eyes lifting from the wallet back to Darius's face, searching for something, perhaps a reaction, perhaps an opening, but finding only the same composed expression that had been there from the start. No anger, no urgency, just clarity. The second officer shifted again, this time stepping slightly closer, his voice lower when he spoke, almost under his breath. "Sir." The word trailed off, unfinished, as if even he was unsure how to proceed. Brennan did not respond to him immediately. His focus remained on Darius, on the man who had not raised his voice, who had not stepped forward, who had not needed to do anything more than stand exactly where he was and let the truth arrive on its own. The golden light deepened as the sun dipped further, stretching shadows longer across the yard, softening the edges of everything except the moment itself. Darius closed the wallet slowly, the leather folding back into place with a quiet finality, and slipped it back into his pocket without breaking eye contact, the movement calm, deliberate, complete. And in that small, controlled action, something shifted fully, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough that the balance of the space no longer felt uncertain, no longer leaning in one direction, but settled, grounded, held firmly by the man who had never needed to raise his voice to take it back. The moment did not explode, it softened, almost imperceptibly, like pressure releasing from a sealed room, and the shift was not in volume or movement, but in the way the air itself seemed to loosen around the edges of the yard. Officer Brennan straightened slowly, not with the same rigid authority he had carried in before, but with something more measured, more careful, as if each movement now required thought instead of instinct. His eyes lingered on Darius for a second longer than before, not searching anymore, not challenging, just recognizing something that had already been established without force. The second officer cleared his throat quietly, the sound small but noticeable, his posture easing just slightly as his hand dropped fully away from his belt, fingers resting at his side in a way that felt less like readiness and more like uncertainty. The breeze moved again, warmer now, carrying with it the steady scent of grilled meat and toasted buns, drifting across the yard and settling into spaces that had felt tense only moments ago. Darius did not step forward. He did not step back. He simply stood where he had always been, grounded in the same spot, his presence unchanged, as if nothing external had ever dictated his balance in the first place. Behind him, a chair shifted as someone slowly sat down, the soft scrape against the concrete almost cautious, like testing whether the moment had truly passed. A child's voice, quieter now but no longer frozen, asked a question that went unanswered, not because it could not be, but because everyone was still listening to something else, something less visible, but just as real. Brennan glanced briefly toward the grill, the thin ribbon of smoke rising steadily into the air, then back toward the table where plates remained untouched, food waiting. Time paused in a way that only tension can create. He inhaled once, deeper this time, then let it out slowly, his shoulders lowering just a fraction, as if something unseen had been set down. "All right," he said finally, his voice no longer edged, no longer pushing, but not fully relaxed either, existing somewhere in between. "We are going to clear out." The words landed without force, without announcement, just a statement of direction that felt almost quieter than everything that had led up to it. His partner nodded once, subtle, immediate, already stepping back toward the gate, his movements less rigid now, less deliberate, like the urgency had drained out of the situation without anyone needing to say it. Brennan remained for a second longer, his gaze returning to Darius, holding there as if considering something unspoken, something that did not fit neatly into procedure or report. Darius met that look without shifting, his expression calm, unchanged, the same steady presence that had carried him through the entire moment without escalation, without retreat. No words passed between them. None were needed. The understanding, whatever it was, existed in the quiet space where conflict had once been. Brennan gave a small nod, almost reflexive, then turned, stepping away across the grass toward the open gate, his boots lighter now against the ground, the sound less pronounced, less weighted. The second officer was already near the sidewalk, glancing back once before continuing forward. The gate creaked softly as it moved, the hinge carrying a faint metallic sound that echoed briefly before fading into the background noise of the street beyond. The yard remained still for another second, maybe two, as if confirming that the moment had truly ended, that nothing else would follow. Then, slowly, life returned, not all at once, but in small pieces, a hand reaching for a cup, a chair adjusting, a quiet breath released. Darius turned back toward the grill, picking up the tongs again with the same calm precision, flipping one of the burgers as the sizzle rose once more, steady and familiar, the sound grounding everything back into place. The smoke curled upward into the soft evening light, thinner now, lighter, carrying no weight except the simple rhythm of a meal continuing exactly where it had left off. The sound of the gate closing did not echo for long, but something about it lingered, not in the air, but in the way people held themselves for just a moment longer, as if the yard needed a second to remember what it had been before everything shifted. The grill continued its steady rhythm, the soft sizzle rising and falling as Darius turned another burger with the same measured care, the edges crisping under the heat, the smell rich and familiar, grounding. A breeze passed through again, lighter now, brushing against faces that were no longer tight with uncertainty, lifting the corner of a napkin, carrying with it the quiet return of something that had almost been lost. One of the neighbors exhaled audibly, a small release that seemed to give others permission to do the same, shoulders loosening, hands lowering, the invisible tension unwinding in slow, uneven threads. Darius did not look back toward the gate. He did not follow the officers with his eyes. Instead, he focused on the grill, adjusting the heat slightly, shifting a burger to a cooler spot, making sure nothing burned, his movement steady, practiced, unchanged, as if the moment that had just passed had not altered the way he approached even the smallest task. His son stepped closer now, careful at first, stopping just a few feet away, the soda can still in his hand, though the fizz had long since settled. "Dad," he said quietly, his voice no longer frozen, but still carrying the echo of what had just happened. "Are we okay?" Darius glanced at him, the same soft warmth returning to his eyes, the same calm that had held everything together when it mattered most. He nodded once, slow and certain. "We are," he said, simple, clear, leaving no space for doubt. The boy nodded back, absorbing the answer, then looked toward the table where the food still waited, untouched but ready, and after a second, he moved again, stepping forward to grab a plate, the small action marking the beginning of something returning to normal. A woman near the edge of the patio picked up a stack of cups, her movements tentative at first, then more natural as she handed one to someone beside her. A chair scraped lightly as someone sat, this time without hesitation, the sound blending into the background rather than cutting through it. The radio crackled softly as if remembering its purpose, then resumed playing, low at first, the music easing back into the space without overwhelming it, filling the gaps where silence had stretched too far. Darius placed a finished burger onto a plate, then another, building them one by one, his hands steady, his focus quiet, each movement deliberate, each action restoring a rhythm that had been interrupted but not broken. The sunlight softened further, shifting from gold to a deeper amber, casting a warm glow across the yard, touching faces, shoulders, the edges of the grill, making everything feel just a little closer, a little more connected. No one spoke about what had happened. No one needed to. The understanding settled into the space on its own, carried in the way people moved, in the way they looked at Darius, not with surprise, not with shock, but with a quiet recognition of something they had just witnessed without it ever needing to be named. Darius finally stepped back from the grill for a moment, wiping his hands again on the cloth, then picking up a plate and handing it to his son, the gesture simple, familiar, unchanged. The boy took it, holding it carefully, then smiled, small but real, before turning toward the table. The music rose slightly, laughter returned in low waves, not loud yet, but growing, rebuilding itself piece by piece. And at the center of it all, Darius stood exactly as he had before, calm, steady, present, not needing to reclaim anything, because he had never lost it in the first place. The music grew a little louder, not enough to take over the space, but enough to remind everyone that this yard belonged to something warm, something ordinary, something that had not been broken, only paused. Plates began to fill, hands reaching for buns, for napkins, for cups of lemonade sweating in the late-day heat, and the quiet rhythm of a gathering slowly stitched itself back together, thread by thread. Darius stood at the grill, the glow of the coals reflecting faintly against his face, his attention on the food, on the timing, on the simple, steady work of making sure everyone would eat. The tension that had once lived in the air did not disappear all at once, but it faded, thinning out like smoke carried away by a patient breeze. His son moved beside him now without hesitation, setting plates on the table, passing them to neighbors, his steps more certain, his voice returning in small pieces as he asked who wanted what. A woman laughed softly at something someone said, the sound gentle at first, then joined by another, and then another, until it settled into the background like it had always been there. Darius picked up a finished burger, placed it onto a plate, then paused for just a second, his hand resting lightly against the edge of the grill as he looked out over the yard. Not searching, not checking, just seeing. The sunlight had softened into a deeper shade now, the kind that turned everything warmer, more forgiving, casting long shadows that stretched across the grass and touched the legs of chairs, the edges of shoes, the corners of the fence. A neighbor stepped closer to him, an older man with a quiet presence, holding his plate in both hands. He did not speak right away. He simply nodded once, a small gesture, but one that carried weight. Darius returned the nod, just as small, just as steady, and handed him a burger without needing to say anything else. The understanding passed between them without words, without explanation, as natural as the exchange itself. Nearby, someone adjusted the radio, raising the volume slightly, letting the music settle more comfortably into the space, no longer hesitant, no longer cautious. The dog returned, tail wagging slowly, weaving between chairs, drawn back by the scent of food and the familiar energy of people who were no longer holding their breath. Darius stepped back again, wiping his hands, then reaching for a bottle of water resting near the cooler. He twisted the cap open, took a slow drink, then set it down, the plastic clicking softly against the table. His shoulders remained relaxed, his posture unchanged, the same quiet steadiness that had carried him through the moment now blending seamlessly back into the rhythm of the afternoon. No one asked him what he had been thinking. No one needed to. The way he stood, the way he moved, the way he returned to the grill without urgency, without lingering on what had passed, said everything that mattered. His son looked up at him again, this time not with uncertainty, but with something closer to understanding, something that did not need to be spoken aloud. Darius met his gaze briefly, then gestured toward the table with a slight tilt of his head, a quiet reminder to keep things moving, to keep the moment alive in the way it was meant to be lived. The boy nodded and turned, carrying another plate forward. The sky shifted slowly toward evening, the light dimming just enough to soften the edges of the day, wrapping the yard in a calm that felt earned rather than given. Conversations grew. Easier, laughter steadier, the sound of people reconnecting with something simple and real. And through it all, Darius remained exactly where he needed to be, not at the center, not above anyone else, but within it, part of it, steady as the grill behind him, present in a way that did not demand attention, yet held it all the same. The evening settled gently over the yard, not with a sudden drop in light, but with a slow, quiet dimming that softened everything it touched, turning the edges of the day into something calm and reflective. The sky shifted into a deep amber fading toward blue, and the first faint glow of a porch light clicked on near the back door, casting a warm circle across the patio. The grill had gone quieter now, its heat still present but no longer demanding attention, the last few burgers resting on a tray, finished, waiting. Conversations drifted easily between small groups, voices low and relaxed, rising and falling like a steady current that no longer carried tension, only connection. Darius stood near the edge of the yard, a paper plate in his hand, finally stepping away from the grill after hours of tending to it. His posture unchanged, his presence still grounded in the same quiet certainty that had defined him all afternoon. He took a slow bite, chewing thoughtfully, not distracted, not distant, just present in the moment in a way that felt complete. His son sat at the table now, laughing softly with a neighbor, the earlier question gone from his voice, replaced by something lighter, something secure. The dog curled near the chair legs, resting, content, its tail occasionally brushing against the grass. A soft wind moved through again, cooler now, carrying the faint scent of charcoal and evening air, lifting strands of sound, and carrying them gently across the yard before letting them settle again. Darius looked out for a moment, past the fence, toward the quiet street beyond, where nothing marked what had happened, where everything moved as it always did, steady and unaware. He did not linger there. He did not hold on to it. Instead, he turned back, his gaze returning to the people around him, to the small circle of warmth that had reformed without effort, without announcement. A neighbor raised a cup slightly in his direction, not a toast, not a statement, just a simple acknowledgement. Darius met it with a nod, small, steady, the same kind of gesture that required no words to carry its meaning. The porch light flickered softly as the night settled in further, illuminating faces in gentle contrast, catching quiet smiles, relaxed shoulders, hands no longer tense. The radio played on, its sound blending seamlessly into the background, no longer tentative, fully part of the space again. Darius set his plate down on the table, wiping his hands one last time, then rested them lightly at his sides, his breathing even, his expression calm. He did not stand taller. He did not need to. The strength that had carried him through the moment remained where it had always been, quiet, steady, unshaken. The yard held that feeling, not loudly, not dramatically, but in the small details, in the way people moved, in the ease that had returned, in the silence that no longer carried tension but something closer to peace. And as the night deepened and the voices softened, What remained was not the interruption, not the conflict, but the quiet presence of a man who had never needed to raise his voice to be heard, and a family that had never needed anything more than that to feel safe.